Thank you for being with us. I'm Susan Miller. Oklahoma City and Tulsa are separated by more than just 107 miles of highway. In 2012, 99 people were murdered in the state capital. In Tulsa, the number was 46, a near record high for Oklahoma City and a near record low for Tulsa. What is it that causes one metro area's most violent crime rate to be so high while another goes the other direction? There are multiple reasons why, but the more important question is, what can Oklahomans do to reduce the number of people whose lives ended so violently?
Breaking down the numbers helps understand, in part, why the murder rate increased so much in the state's biggest city compared to Tulsa's murder rate, which went down last year. Of the 99 Oklahoma City killings, gang-related violence claimed 28 lives, compared to 14 the year before. There were 11 robbery-related killings and only one in 2011. Officer-involved shootings were up to 6. In 2011, there were only 2. And there were 10 self-defense-related homicides compared to none in 2011. Tulsa Police Department spokesman Leland Ashley says most of that city's homicides involve people who knew each other.
But most of our violent crimes, or even our homicides, are related to the victim knew the suspect, vice versa. We have very few stranger-type homicides. Altercations led with 10, domestic ended about 9. We had drug activity with about 5 homicides, and also we had robberies we had about 5 robberies, and we had 6 that were unknown. And also homicides that involve police officer shootings, officer-involved shootings. We had 4 of those.
In fact, that is a murder rate breakdown that most law enforcement agencies see from year to year. Dr. Ryan Brown is an associate professor of social psychology at the University of Oklahoma. Professor Brown says most homicides occur from what begins as a trivial altercation between people who know each other and then can't let go of what they are arguing about.
That is the number one pattern across the state, across the United States, and really across the world in terms of the seeds of homicide.
Professor Brown says another reason why murder rates between the two metros were so different is something as basic as geography.
Oklahoma City is not just in the middle of the state, but it's at the nexus of 3 interstates, I-35, I-40, and I-44. Only the last one runs through Tulsa. That's important because the interstate is a system for moving things.
And Professor Brown says one of those interstates is tied to Mexico, where gun violence and drugs have claimed thousands of lives.
And where does I-35 end? It ends in Mexico. So looking up and down the I-35 corridor, particularly coming up from the south, you're likely to see changes in violence related to gangs and related to drugs, which are, of course, interconnected with each other.
Dr. Brent Turvey is a professor of criminology at Oklahoma City University. He says acknowledging that drugs and alcohol are most often involved in murders means the state has to realize what it really takes to begin to address the problem.
This is the kind of situation where it screams out for drug courts, for more treatment programs. And if you don't have that, if you reduce those kinds of programs, you're going to have more of that violence. You're going to have more recidivism. You're going to have a lot more frequent flyers, as they like to call them.
The category of deaths showing the biggest increase in Oklahoma City last year was self-defense homicides, a trend that is being found across the country in states that have so-called stand your ground or make my day laws.
And when you do that, what you see is not a large increase in overall homicides, some increase in overall homicides from before to after that law was passed. But if you focus on homicides related to handguns, which is a meaningful fraction of the overall homicide rate, what you see is a substantial increase of about 50%.
71% of the homicides in Oklahoma City last year involved guns. And there is one group of people most often involved in deaths stemming from handguns and self-defense laws.
And in particular, you see an elevation among men, which is consistent with what I said before about the trivial altercation that gets elevated and this sense of a threat to status. And in particular, you see it among white men.
That, says Professor Brown, ties in with a defined cultural pattern.
Men in general, white men in particular in certain parts of the country, have an elevated vigilance to threats to their status and reputation. It relates to a cultural phenomenon known as the culture of honor.
A culture most prevalent in the southern and western United States.
And Oklahoma is right in the center of the South and the West in the United States, so we're kind of at the elbow of these regions.
Both professors agree on another point. Dealing with violent crime is something the state has focused on after the fact. They believe it's time to get in front of the issue.
And I see the same issues that you have in Oklahoma as anywhere else. You've got drugs, you've got a underfunded police department, you've got a reactive police department. Until you start dealing with the drug problem as a health problem, and until you start funding your police department properly, and you start giving them the tools to act proactively, you're going to see these numbers go up.
You've got to have sustained will, and that is very, very difficult, right? You start talking about gun control or social policy, you get into mostly just endless debates. I would actually like to see us do an end run around those debates by focusing on the most crucial years, because which side, on the right or the left or anywhere in between, who's going to argue that we shouldn't care about children?
A new report from the National Center for Health Statistics shows the United States has far more violent deaths than any other wealthy nation, in part because there are so many residents who own guns and store them in unlocked places in their homes. The report also found that the United States has the highest rate of firearm ownership, with about 35 to 50% of the world's civilian-owned firearms. The study also concludes that lax gun rules are a major contributor to the low life expectancy rate that Americans have compared to their global counterparts.